Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
In the late 1970s, Columbus, Ohio, was a growing urban center, but just 25 miles southwest sat Circleville, the quintessential small American rural town. With a population of just 13,000, Circleville was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody and secrets were difficult to keep. It was a place where doors were often left unlocked, and life moved at a slower, predictable pace. That is, until 1976, when anonymous letters started appearing in mailboxes across town, postmarked from Columbus and written in an eerie, block-letter handwriting. These letters were full of detailed, intimate information about the personal lives of Circleville's residents. There was no return address, but it was clear that the sender was someone with extensive knowledge of the town and its people. One of the first targets was Gordon Massey, the superintendent of Westfall Schools. On the morning of March 3, 1977, Massey arrived at work to find a disturbing letter waiting for him. The letter accused him of inappropriate advances toward female employees, particularly bus drivers, and warned that if his actions did not stop, the writer would be forced to contact the school board. The threats escalated, with one letter even stating that Massey's brake lines would be cut if he continued his alleged behavior. That same day, a letter also arrived at the school board, describing Massey's alleged affairs and demanding his termination. However, there was no concrete evidence against him, and he denied all accusations. But then, a letter was sent to the vice principal, referencing a specific bus driver only by her employee number, 62917. Upon investigation, that number was linked to Mary Gillespie. Mary Gillespie was a well-respected woman in the community, a bus driver with a close-knit group of friends and a loving family. When she checked her mailbox in March 1977, she found an anonymous letter waiting for her. The letter warned her to stay away from Massey and claimed that she was under surveillance. It referenced her children and included specific details about her daily routine. Terrified, Mary kept the letter to herself, but more followed in the coming weeks, each one more aggressive than the last. Then her husband, Ron Gillespie, received a letter of his own. It detailed his wife's supposed affair with Massey and threatened him if he failed to take action. The letter writer also claimed to know what kind of vehicle Ron drove and where he worked, leaving little doubt that the Gillespies were being watched. When Ron confronted Mary, she denied any involvement with Massey, but admitted to receiving similar letters. The couple decided to ignore the threats, hoping they would stop. However, 2 weeks later, Ron received another letter, with the handwriting modified slightly, likely to make it harder to trace. This time, the writer promised to expose the affair publicly by posting signs and broadcasting the information over CB radio. Alongside the letters, Ron and Mary started receiving disturbing phone calls. Uncertain of what to do, they confided in their family, including Ron's sister, Karen, and her husband, Paul Freshour. The group compiled a list of possible suspects, and Mary's prime suspect was fellow bus driver David Longberry, who had once made advances toward her and had become bitter when she rejected him. Paul agreed to write a letter to Longberry, warning him to stop the harassment, and soon the letters ceased. Life appeared to return to normal, but that peace was short-lived. In August 1977, signs began appearing all over town, written in the same ominous block letters. The messages accused Mary of having an affair with Massey, and some even made the shocking claim that Massey was involved with Mary's 12-year-old daughter, Tracy. The accusations were beyond disturbing, and every morning, Ron would get up early to drive around town, removing the signs before Mary and their children could see them. The strain was immense. Then, one evening, while Mary was out of town, Ron received a phone call. The caller taunted him, claiming to be watching the house and describing Ron's truck in detail. Enraged, Ron told his children he recognized the voice and was going to put an end to it. He grabbed his pistol, kissed his daughter goodbye, jumped into his red and white pickup truck, and sped off. Minutes later, at 10:25 p.m., Ron was dead. His truck had crashed into a tree just a few miles from his house, along roads he knew well. The sheriff arrived at the scene and found something peculiar. A bullet had been fired from Ron's gun, but no bullet hole or spent bullet was found anywhere. The sheriff ruled the death an accident, attributing it to Ron's blood alcohol level, which was found to be 0.16, twice the legal limit. However, Ron's family found this hard to believe. Ron was not much of a drinker, and they did not believe he would leave his children alone unless he had a serious reason to. They pushed for a deeper investigation, but the sheriff dismissed their concerns, and within days, Ron's truck was sent to a junkyard and destroyed. There were whispers that a suspect had been questioned and even passed a polygraph test, but their identity was never revealed. The town was left with unanswered questions, and the letters continued, now accusing the sheriff of a cover-up. Mary, now a widow, continued to receive threatening letters for years. Then in 1983, she encountered the most chilling threat yet. While driving her school bus near the site of her husband's fatal crash, she spotted another crude sign accusing her of having an inappropriate relationship with her own daughter. Enraged, she stopped to remove it and noticed a piece of string running from the sign to a small box. Inside the box was a handgun, rigged to fire if she had pulled the sign from the ground. Investigators found that the serial number had been filed off, but forensic experts managed to recover it. The gun was traced back to none other than Paul Freshour. Paul admitted the gun was his, but claimed it had been stolen weeks earlier. Despite his protests of innocence, he was arrested for attempted murder. During interrogation, the sheriff asked Paul to copy the style of the Circleville letters. When Paul complied, the sheriff claimed it was a perfect match and used it as evidence against him. Paul was convicted and sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. However, even after he was incarcerated, the letters continued. The new wave of letters, still postmarked from Columbus, was sent all over central Ohio, including to the prison warden. Despite being placed in solitary confinement, Paul still allegedly authored them, leading to his parole being denied. In 1993, after serving 10 years, Paul was finally released. By that time, the letters had stopped. Many still believe he was framed, possibly by his ex-wife, Karen, who had been embroiled in a bitter divorce with him at the time of his arrest. Some suspect Massey's son, William, or even David Longberry, who later fled town after being accused of child abuse. Others believe there were multiple letter writers over the years. To this day, the true identity of the Circleville letter writer remains a mystery. What began as an anonymous act of harassment spiraled into a saga of fear, accusations, and tragedy that left an entire town in turmoil. The case remains one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Neil Boward grew up in Akron, Ohio, a city known for its industrial roots and the nickname Rubber City, thanks to its history with tire manufacturing. Neil, a 21-year-old biracial man of Black and Korean descent, lived with his mother in an apartment on Ogle Terrace. He was known for his signature curly hair and wire-rimmed glasses, a young man with a quiet demeanor but a kind heart. Neil struggled with mental health issues, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and depression. He was on medication and regularly attended doctor's appointments to manage his condition. Despite his challenges, Neil was close to his family, particularly his mother, who cared for him deeply. On Monday, July 24, 2006, Neil and his mother left their apartment to walk to a doctor's appointment. It was a routine day, or so it seemed. After the appointment, Neil mentioned he was hungry and wanted some fruit roll-ups. The two decided to stop at an Aldi grocery store on their way home. It was around 5:30 p.m., and the streets of Akron were bustling with the usual rush hour traffic. Neil and his mother entered the Aldi store, located at the corner of South Main and West Thornton Street. They picked up a few items, including the fruit roll-ups Neil wanted, and joined the checkout line. Everything seemed normal until Neil suddenly turned around and bolted out of the store. His mother, alarmed, called after him, but Neil didn't stop. He ran across the busy street, dodging cars, and headed toward a nearby railroad bridge. The bridge spanned a set of active CSX train tracks, and a train was passing underneath at that very moment. Neil's mother chased after him, her heart pounding with fear. She reached the bridge just in time to see Neil leap onto the moving train. The drop from the bridge to the train was estimated to be between 15 and 25 feet, depending on where he landed. She screamed his name, but it was too late. The train continued on its path, carrying Neil away. Frantic, Neil's mother tried to flag down help. It took several minutes before someone stopped to assist her, which seemed odd given the busy nature of the area. Eventually, police were called, and they arrived at the scene within minutes. Authorities immediately began searching the area around the bridge and the train tracks. They contacted CSX to alert them to the situation and requested information about the train's route. The train had been heading east and was required to slow down to about 1/3 of its normal speed as it passed through the city. This gave investigators hope that Neil might still be on the train or nearby. CSX conducted a thorough search of the train and the surrounding tracks, but there was no sign of Neil. The train had already passed through Akron, and searches at subsequent stops yielded no clues. It was as if Neil had vanished into thin air. Neil's disappearance baffled investigators and his family. How could a young man jump onto a moving train in broad daylight, in the middle of a busy city, and simply disappear? The lack of media coverage only added to the mystery. Despite the bizarre circumstances, Neil's case received little attention, leaving his family to struggle for answers on their own. Neil's aunt started a blog, Find Neil Now, in an effort to keep his story alive. She expressed her frustration with the lack of public interest, writing, "We have tried so many ways to get his face out there in the public eye. But no one feels this is a newsworthy story. This hurts my heart to know the world is more interested in the rising cost of gas or a new store opening more than finding a human being." The family's pain was palpable. They believed more could have been done to find Neil, but without media attention or widespread awareness, their efforts felt futile. In the absence of concrete evidence, theories about Neil's fate began to emerge. Some speculated that he had survived the jump but was injured, possibly with a sprained ankle or broken bone. If he had managed to get off the train at some point, he could have wandered away from the tracks, disoriented and in need of help. Others wondered if Neil had fallen off the train as it picked up speed, landing somewhere along the tracks. A former CSX worker noted that maintenance crews regularly inspect the tracks, and any body would likely have been found within 10 feet of the rails. However, if Neil had been able to stumble away, he might have gone unnoticed. There was also the possibility that someone had picked Neil up at a train stop further down the line. If he had been injured or confused, he might have accepted help from a stranger, leading him even further from where he was last seen. Neil's disappearance took a heavy toll on his family. His mother, who had witnessed his leap onto the train, was haunted by the image of her son vanishing before her eyes. The lack of answers only deepened her pain. She and the rest of the family were left to grapple with the uncertainty of Neil's fate. Neil's mental health struggles added another layer of complexity to the case. Had something triggered him that day? Was the doctor's appointment related to his condition? Without more information, it was impossible to know what might have driven Neil to act so impulsively. Despite the passage of time, Neil's family has never given up hope. They continue to search for answers, clinging to the possibility that Neil might still be out there, alive but unable to find his way home. His aunt's blog remains a testament to their determination, a plea for the public to remember Neil and help bring him back. Neil's case is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of mental health awareness. It also highlights the need for greater attention to missing persons cases, particularly those involving individuals with mental health challenges. As the years go by, Neil's story remains a haunting mystery. His disappearance serves as a reminder of the countless missing persons cases that go unnoticed, their stories untold. Neil is described as a biracial male, 5 feet 8 inches tall, with curly black hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He was last seen wearing a red t-shirt, blue jeans, white K-Swiss sneakers, and a watch with a gold band on his left wrist. He has growth lumps on both knees, a prominent scar above his ankle, and a pierced left ear. His nickname is Neil Beale. If you have any information about Neil Bowyer, please contact the Akron Police Department at 330-375-2181. Phyllis Brewer was last seen in Lowellville, Ohio, on June 13, 1981, when she left a residence in the 400 block of North Hubbard Road, seemingly for a walk, and never returned. What makes her case particularly unusual is that she was apparently never reported missing at the time. It wasn't until 2014, after her sister passed away, that authorities even became aware that Phyllis was unaccounted for. When the coroner's office attempted to finalize records, they realized that one of her siblings was missing, prompting an official investigation into her whereabouts. By then, her parents and all of her siblings had already passed away, leaving few immediate family members to provide details about her disappearance. However, investigators were able to obtain a DNA sample from her niece, offering at least some avenue for potential identification if remains were ever discovered. Phyllis, at the time of her disappearance, was a student at Conneaut High School in Ashtabula County, Ohio, which was located about an hour north of where she was last seen. She lived with her father in Conneaut, just off Interstate 90, but her surviving relatives have long suspected that he may have been involved in her disappearance. If true, this would mean that Phyllis never actually made it back to Lowellville at all, and that her disappearance originated closer to home. This theory remains unproven, but given the lack of other viable explanations, it continues to linger over the case. What adds another layer of mystery is that, according to court records, Phyllis Brewer appears to have had interactions with the Conneaut Police Department in 1982, more than a year after she supposedly vanished. The records indicate that she was even incarcerated for 10 days in May of that year before being released. This raises unsettling questions. Was Phyllis actually alive in 1982? And if so, where had she been for the previous year? Or was someone else using her identity? If it was truly her, then the timeline of her disappearance needs to be reconsidered entirely. This anomaly has led investigators to examine whether she disappeared at a later date than initially believed, or if someone may have assumed her identity for reasons unknown. However, with so much time having passed, and with so little documentation of her movements after she left her father's home, tracking down the truth remains a daunting challenge. Her case is one of those rare instances where a person can seemingly vanish, unnoticed, until decades later, when simple bureaucratic record-keeping raises the alarm. The sun was setting over Cincinnati, Ohio, casting a warm, golden glow over the city as Dion Aikman stepped off the Greyhound bus. He stretched his arms, feeling the stiffness in his joints after the long ride from Memphis, Tennessee. Dion, a 32-year-old with a magnetic personality, was known as the life of the party. His infectious laugh and easygoing nature made him a favorite among friends and family. But tonight he was here for one reason: to see his half-brother, William Roland. William, at 22, was the quieter of the two. He had a laid-back demeanor that contrasted sharply with Dion's exuberance. Despite their 10-year age gap, the brothers were inseparable. They had grown up in different households, but their bond was unshakable. Dion had been looking forward to this visit for weeks. It had been too long since they last saw each other, and he was eager to catch up. As Dion made his way to William's apartment, he couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. Cincinnati had always been a city of contrast for him, vibrant yet gritty, full of life, but with an undercurrent of danger. He remembered the struggles they had both faced, the mistakes they had made, and the recent turn toward redemption. Both brothers had recently been baptized, vowing to leave their troubled pasts behind. Dion had even talked about moving to St. Louis to start fresh, away from the temptations and bad influences that had plagued him in Memphis. When Dion arrived at William's place, the two embraced warmly. "Man, it's good to see you," Dion said, clapping his brother on the back. William smiled, his eyes lighting up. You too, bro. Let's make tonight count. The brothers decided to hit the town, eager to relive old times. They started at a local bar, sharing stories and laughter over drinks. Dion, ever the social butterfly, quickly struck up conversations with strangers, while William watched with quiet amusement. They moved on to a club, the bass from the music thumping in their chests as they danced and enjoyed the night. Around 9:45 p.m., they found themselves at the Parktown Cafe, a modest establishment on Lynn Street. The neighborhood was rough, with graffiti-covered buildings and a sense of neglect that hung heavy in the air. The cafe itself was unremarkable, its sign barely visible under the grime. Inside, the atmosphere was dimly lit and smoky, with a handful of patrons scattered around. The brothers ordered drinks and settled into a booth. Dion was in high spirits, recounting a hilarious story from his time in Memphis. William laughed, but there was a tension in his eyes that Dion didn't notice. As the night wore on, a man entered the cafe and approached their table. He was tall, with a hardened expression and a demeanor that screamed trouble. Dion William, the man said, his voice low. Come outside for a minute. We need to talk. Dion exchanged a glance with William, who looked uneasy. Who's this guy? Dion asked, but William just shook his head. It's fine. Let's just see what he wants. The brothers followed the man outside, leaving their drinks unfinished. The door swung shut behind them, and the cafe returned to its usual hum. No one inside thought much of it, until the man returned alone a few minutes later, his face unreadable. Dion and William were nowhere to be seen. The next morning, construction workers on McMicken Avenue heard a faint ringing coming from a dumpster. Curious, they investigated and made a chilling discovery. A cell phone, 2 wallets, a set of keys, and a white Cincinnati Reds ball cap stained with blood. The phone belonged to Dion. When a worker answered it, the voice on the other end was frantic, a relative of the brothers, worried sick because they hadn't been heard from since the night before. The discovery sent shockwaves through the family. Dion and William were not the type to disappear without a word. Their father joined the search, combing the area with a growing sense of dread. Police launched an investigation, but the trail was cold. Witnesses confirmed that the brothers had been at the Parktown Cafe, and a few reported seeing a white van in the area around the same time. The van was linked to a local drug dealer, but no one could say for sure what had happened. As days turned into weeks, the case grew colder. The brothers' belongings were found, but there was no sign of them. The blood on William's cap suggested foul play, but without bodies, the investigation stalled. The family clung to hope, but deep down, they feared the worst. In 2010, a breakthrough seemed possible when a massive police raid targeted Duke's Place, a notorious establishment on Lynn Street. The raid uncovered illegal gambling, drugs, weapons, and evidence linking the operation to multiple murders. Among the victims named in the investigation were Dion Aikman and William Roland. Duke's Place was no ordinary venue. Hidden behind the facade of a convenience store, it was a hub of criminal activity. Patrons had to pass through multiple layers of security, including a buzzer system and closed-circuit TV, to access the high-stakes poker games and other illicit activities inside. The owner, Derek Reagan, was arrested, but he denied any involvement in the brothers' disappearance. The raid reignited interest in the case, but it also raised more questions than answers. What had Dion and William been doing at Duke's Place? Were they involved in the illegal activities, or had they stumbled into something they couldn't escape? The family insisted that the brothers had turned their lives around, but the shadow of their past loomed large. Theories about the brothers' fate abound. Some believe they were targeted by someone from their past, seeking retaliation for an old grudge. Others think they may have been caught in the crossfire of a drug deal gone wrong. The man who called them outside the Parktown Cafe remains a mystery. Was he a friend, an enemy, or something in between? The location of their disappearance adds another layer of complexity. The West End neighborhood is a maze of abandoned buildings and forgotten streets, a place where secrets are easily buried. The Ohio River, just 2 miles away, offers a grim possibility. that their bodies were disposed of in its murky depths. Despite the passage of time, the family continues to seek answers. Dion and William are listed in multiple missing persons databases, and their case remains open. Shawn Scrappy, known to his friends and family as Scrappy, was a 24-year-old father of two from Harrison County, Ohio. Shawn's life was marked by a series of poor choices and run-ins with the law. Diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression, Shawn struggled to stay on the right path, often finding himself in and out of jail for crimes ranging from theft to drug possession. Despite his troubled past, Shawn was known for his infectious personality and his desire to make people laugh. He was a small guy with a big heart, but his life was a constant battle between the good influences in his life, his father and his aunt, Julie Scott, and the bad influences that seemed to pull him back into a life of crime. Shawn's nickname, Scrappy, suited him well. He was a fighter, both in life and in his struggles with mental health. But on December 23, 2017, Shawn's fight came to an abrupt and mysterious end. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of questions, lies, and a family desperate for answers. The events of December 23, 2017, are shrouded in confusion and conflicting stories. What is known is that Shawn was with Preston Yates, a man he had met earlier that year at a halfway house. Preston, like Shawn, had a history of criminal activity, and the two had recently been involved in a theft at the Rosebud Mining Company on December 10th. During that theft, Shawn had left his phone in the stolen truck, which led to the police identifying him as a suspect. Shawn and Preston had returned the truck, but the damage was done. Shawn was now a wanted man. On the night of December 23rd, Shawn and Preston were allegedly chased by someone, though the details of who was chasing them and why remain unclear. According to Preston's initial story, they were in a car with Louise Sword Putnam, Preston's sister, when Shawn began to panic, claiming that the police were following them. Preston claimed that they pulled over on Route 250 near the old children's home, and Shawn got out of the car and ran into the woods. Preston and Louise drove off, leaving Shawn behind. That was the last time anyone saw Shawn. But Preston's story quickly fell apart. The next day, Louise went to the police and recanted her statement, claiming that Shawn was never in the car with them. She admitted that she had lied to protect her brother. This revelation cast doubt on Preston's entire account of what happened that night. Shawn's disappearance sparked an immediate search, but the investigation was plagued by inconsistencies and dead ends. Shawn's family, particularly his Aunt Julie Scott, took matters into their own hands, determined to find out what had happened to him. Julie, along with Shawn's father and other family members, began piecing together the events of that night, uncovering a web of lies and deception. One of the key pieces of evidence in the case was the cell phone pings from Shawn and Preston's phones. The last ping from Shawn's phone was at 6:38 p.m. on December 23rd, near Preston's mother's house in Yorkville, Ohio. The ping showed that Shawn and Preston had been together earlier that day, but after 6:38 p.m., Shawn's phone went silent. Preston's phone, on the other hand, continued to ping in the area, suggesting that he had remained in Yorkville after Shawn disappeared. Julie and her family also discovered that Preston's car had been impounded on December 23rd, meaning that the story of him and Shawn being chased in his car that night was impossible. This revelation further discredited Preston's account and raised suspicions about his involvement in Shawn's disappearance. As the investigation continued, several theories emerged about what might have happened to Shawn. One theory was that Shawn had been killed at a party hosted by Tina Ray Strothers, a local woman with ties to the criminal underworld. According to rumors, Shawn had shown up at the party, a fight broke out, and he was never seen again. However, there was no concrete evidence to support this theory, and Tina, who was incarcerated at the time, refused to speak about the incident. Another theory was that Shawn had been killed by members of a local gang, possibly as retaliation for something he had done or as part of a larger criminal operation. Shawn had a history of associating with gang members, and his disappearance could have been the result of a dispute or a power struggle within the gang. The most compelling theory, however, pointed to Preston Yates. Preston had a history of lying to the police and changing his story multiple times. He had also made suspicious statements, such as telling Julie that he would never do time for Antil and that snitches end up at the pig farm. These statements, combined with the inconsistencies in his story, led many to believe that Preston was involved in Shawn's disappearance. Despite the efforts of Shawn's family and law enforcement, the investigation into his disappearance stalled. Detective Robert Tokayer, the lead investigator on the case, was accused of mishandling the investigation. Tokayer had a personal connection to the case. He was the cousin of Brittany Cunningham's mother, Brittany being Shawn's girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. Tokayer was later removed from the case after it was discovered that he had failed to process key evidence, including Shawn's sweatpants, which had been handed over to him by Julie. The case was eventually taken over by Detective Smith, who worked diligently to piece together the events of December 23rd. However, without a body or concrete evidence, the investigation remained at a standstill. Shawn's family refused to give up. Julie Scott became the face of the search for Shawn, tirelessly advocating for him and pushing for answers. She created a Facebook page called Bring Shawn Home to raise awareness about Shawn's disappearance and to keep his case in the public eye. Julie also worked closely with law enforcement, providing them with any information she could gather. Despite the challenges, Julie remained hopeful that one day Shawn would be found. She believed that the truth was out there, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter how long it took. His case remains unsolved,